Marhaba, sabah al-khair. I'm very glad to be here. I thank also the organizers for inviting me. It wasn't easy to get here, and without any coordination, actually my talk will almost be a chapter 2 of Professor Peterberg, and we'll see then how it melts together. But I want to bring you very much both to the ground and to the height of concepts, continuing, of course, the attempt to understand what is actually happening with the Israeli regime, which I totally agree, continues the settlement pulse, the immigration control, and what I call ethnocratic framework. What I want to try and see also through the example of the Bedouins in the Nakab, which is where I am now, how the regime actually institutionalized itself, how the historical trajectory becomes laws, regulations, institutions, and how it manages to stabilize the situation and make it very difficult to resist. And then think together, perhaps, following also from the discussion yesterday with Nadim Rouhana and Asad Ghanem and Al Mouin and others, how reconceptualizing the situation, which I would very much support the apartheid scenario, help us resist it, wage new boundaries for the struggle, new legal strategies, new international mobilization, and of course local mobilizations, which are very important as they work in tandem. So my title there is, as you see, the Arabs in southern Israel, Palestine, the apartheid scenario. And I want to try and also report to you on a forgotten community, the Arab al-Janub. Hardly anybody talks about them, but it's a very important community, and it's a very pivotal point from which to look at the whole regime situation. It's a critical link because it bridges the colonized territories. I tried not to use occupied territories anymore because they colonized territories, and which is very different from occupation, which southern Lebanon, for example, was occupied and the army could retreat. But when it's colonized, like Peterberg just showed, it's a whole different regime. So they bridged the colonized territories with Israel proper. The Bedouins are under pseudo-military regime now, as I'll show you. And this is in space, but also in time. The Bedouins are the one community that actually still living the Nakba, not in a way, of course, the Lajain also still live the Nakba, but as a daily struggle on the issues, on the core issues of the Nakba. So in time, from before 1948 till now, this issue is still alive in the Nakab. And very much also, I want to show that it's not all gloom and doom, even though the situation is quite grave, but there is agency and there is struggle and there is resourcefulness and things are happening on the ground. And the last point of departure is that the state strategy, because they told me this Jalsa is about state policy. I have to put it up front, that there is a new phase in Israeli colonial thinking. And there is a debate currently whether it starts with Oslo, or it starts with the Second Intifada, but definitely there's a new stage. And the new stage is a dangerous stage because the expansion, the power of the colonizing state is receding. They've reached their limit, but without changing the ideology. The ideology of supremacy continues, whereas the space has to be reconfigured. So southern Lebanon, Gaza is become a Bantustan, and also in the Nakab there is limits to state power, and we are actually making some gains on the ground with tens of thousands of people that are supposed to be evicted, and they stay on the ground, and they gradually, some of them get recognition. But with this new phase, the policy is becoming something like hiding or ghettoizing or quarantining, still yet to find the right word, creating a gray space, which is what, in my introduction, this is what I work theoretically about. Spaces that are neither incorporated, they're not getting any equality, but they're not excluded or destroyed either. They are the making of apartheid. They are second and third class citizenship. That this is the way the ethnocratic settler state is managing space now. And this is where I want to get at the end, if I have time, that work sort of in progress is trying to make comparison to Area C in the Daf al-Gharbiya and the Nakab. And I just did a big report also with my other hat with B'Tselem on the Area C and the human rights violation there. and compare it to the Nakab, which is not very different. The regime is really quite similar. And in that respect, we have this kind of strategy of trying to hide, trying to quarantine, trying to ghettoize as the way settler society institutionalizes itself into something that appears in the eyes of the majority to be quite a sustainable regime. Okay. I can take you to this incident. Will you tell me 10 minutes from the end?
Sure.
Okay. This is the first coming of Lieberman. Now we have the second coming of Lieberman. In 2003, he became the Minister for Land. The first policy he enacted was a very sort of subtle law enforcement. Is taking airplanes and spraying the Bedouin fields with poisonous chemicals. It was really horrific for 3 continuous years. Something like 50 to 60,000 dunams were destroyed on people cultivating the ancestors' land. They're not cultivating anywhere else, just ancestor land, but the state refuses to register as theirs. There's a whole there. But when you can see what he actually says, is confirms what Peter Gregg said and other people as how the colonial mind steals work. We must protect our lands. Of course, our lands is the Jews and the other Arabs are there, happen to be citizens, not in the definition of ours. But they're also the last reserves for the Jewish people, right? This is a continuous argument, a daily argument in committees, in the courts. This is what we have to reserve for the Jewish people. So the people of the Nakab have to move, the present people have to move for the possibility of some absent people might appear in the land. And this is the government rhetoric. This is the second coming of Lieberman. And of course, Lieberman, I want to stress, is just the tip of the iceberg. Because Kadima, Labour, and Likud all courted him, of course, they also endorse to some extent his agenda. It's not that he's so different, but he says it more bluntly. So this is in the last election just a month ago. The slogan was no loyalty, no citizenship. Instead of course, Bil'aks, what has to be Bil'aks, no citizenship, no loyalty. That's the sequence. But the no loyalty, no citizenship, he had a slogan going all around the country. Only Lieberman understands Arabic. And of course, he's Russian too. He's an immigrant. So this all was very much. And then the other slogan is that they should treat the Arab member Knesset like we treat the Hamas. That was one of his election rallies. So then I go to the Nakab and I say loyalty. And this is actually what we're going to face now. This is Wadi al-Na'am, one of the most deprived, most distressed. In fact, the Bedouins and Nakab are probably the most deprived and marginalized community in the whole of Palestine, including the Mukhayyamat. And suffering house demolition, incredible distress, no facilities, but rebuilding. So this is just in January, during the Gaza offensive that we did. I worked with the Majlis Aqlimi, with the regional council for the Bedouin unrecognized villages. And constantly we do rebuilding. So this is rebuilding a mosque that you can see on the top left was just destroyed about a week before. And there was a ceremony for those interested in gender relations, men only, but this is another factor. And Hussein al-Rifaya, the chair of the RSUV, the Regional Council for Unrecognized Villages, said, we will help rebuild every demolished house. Yes, it's officially illegal, but our people have been here for generations, before the law, and have nowhere to go, which is absolutely true. We build this mosque to show the state and our community, and it's quite important because a lot of these activities for the community is defiant to the state, but the major impact is the community for the Sumud. That the Arabs of the south are staying on their land. Israel may use force and destruction both in the Nakab and Gaza, which was at the same time and very close to one another, but we will always rebuild. This is the kind of mobilization on the ground. Now, this is a typical policy document if you're interested in seeing the contradictions that we live with all the time. On the right is the regional plan for Beersheba region. You see nice, neat hierarchy of urban centers, like every geographer would be proud of this kind of region. On the left, you can see an aerial photographs. And this is all the unrecognized villages around Beersheba of the people that are condemned into gray space, into the idea that they're not equal citizens, they deny the services. Their villages are unrecognized because the state denies their land ownership. And this is a whole lecture about how the state is able to deny the land ownership. It's not that difficult. Also, I wrote a whole book about the 77 ways to confiscate land in Israel. It's not that difficult. Most, by the way, when you go to court with most Bedouins, some of them go to court, most of them lost hope because there hasn't been even one decision in favor of an Arab landowner. But sometimes when you actually make some breakthrough in some kind of argument, you find that the land has been confiscated by, say, 3 or 4 or 5 different laws. So the same piece of land so there's really no possibility of breaking through a very sophisticated land regime, even more sophisticated than Patrick Wolf would explain in Australia. And Australia is very sophisticated with declaring the whole of Australia terra nullius, but Israel is even more sophisticated. The whole thing in terms of regime is interesting because it calls itself a democracy. And this is also part of the work that I've done with Nadim Rouhana and Asad Ghanim, also to expose that and to show that there is no way you can call this kind of structural inequality and continuing dynamics of expansion a democracy. But you see, this is a way the creeping apartheid situation is actually on the ground. You have the policy on the right, you have on the left the reality, and the people in that reality, just like in Area C, have to deal with trying to get rights, trying to get schools, trying to live a life when they're not recognized. This is one practice of a state among many other practices, like the prohibition of marriages between Palestinians on both sides of the Green Line, like the immigration laws, like the accessibility to child allowance, etc., etc. So many practices that continually keep millions of people in unequal citizenship. So the main point here is that we are in a creeping apartheid situation. It's creeping because both it moves between 2 sides of the Green Line, but also it's undeclared. And this is where the Israelis are much smarter than the South Africans. They actually practice it in a way that apartheid is under one regime, different citizenships according to your origin, according to your race. So this is very much the situation. Nobody really can deny it, but you can declare it a different way. These people don't belong. These people don't have citizenship. This is where the line. Of course, the Green Line is only for Arabs. The Green Line doesn't exist for Jews. So you do declare that beyond the Green Line is a different legal space, but not for the 500,000 Jews that live there. So there's a very sophisticated system to avoid the obvious, if you go above and look at it, that is an apartheid system. So it's creeping all the time. It's consolidating. And as I said, it's in a dangerous stage now. I don't have time to go into theory. Maybe I'll just, in my recent work, I developed, continuing from Peterberg, the idea of different stages of a Zionist colonial project. And of course, a pivotal one, the most important one, is the second, the period of ethnic cleansing, that the regime actually is still based. The Israeli regime, if there is one core to it, is the Nakba, right? Protecting the achievements of the Nakba. But the other stages are important. I think the last stage, which I call in my book oppressive consolidation, where there's some selective retreats without changing the ideology. And when we look at it comparatively in history, this is always a dangerous stage. Say when the Turks retreated, it became the Armenian massacre. When the Serbs retreated from Bosnia, then we had the Kosovo ethnic cleansing. And if yesterday we talked about danger, there is a danger, perhaps not to the same scale, that a retreat of Israel under some kind of international pressure the anger will be wrought on the Arabs inside Israel, and especially the Bedouins, who are the weakest. Let me just continue.